the deaths of 4 Palestinians in the Nablus area, 2 sets of cousins in 2 villages regularly affected by Israel's illegal settlement policies. Let's listen in and let's watch the day's events.
Grieving when no mother should. This woman spends Mother's Day struck by surprise and grief. Her son Muhammad killed by Israeli soldiers a few hours ago. Roaring anger passes her by as hundreds of mourners carry the bodies of her Muhammad and his cousin Salah to their final resting place. The Israeli army says the young men attempted to stab soldiers on regular patrol near their village AWARTA, southeast of Nablus. The families say the victims were looking for scrap metal when they were shot. The medical examiner at the Rafidia hospital where the 2 young men were brought confirms both were shot several times in the chest and abdomen area by live fire.
The use of deadly force against Palestinian civilians by Israeli soldiers is raising serious concern among human rights organizations. More so because this incident in AWARTA is not the only one. Earlier on Monday, families in the nearby village of Iraq Pourin buried another set of teenage cousins killed by Israeli fire.
Muhammad and Usaid, 16 and 18 years of age, were paraded in their small village of 1,100 residents before being laid to rest, giving a chance to the residents and neighbors to bid the teenagers goodbye. "Oh, my darling boy," Usaid's mother kept repeating. "He didn't get a chance to enjoy his life," she told me. Conflicting accounts of how these killings occurred too. The Israeli army claims the soldiers did not fire live rounds at Usaid and Muhammad, but X-rays taken of Usaid shows otherwise. According to the Israeli human rights organization Beit Salem, this cylinder-like object is a live round lodged in his brain. And the doctors who received the teenagers in Nablus's Rafidia hospital are adamant Usaid and Muhammad were killed by live fire. These deadly incidents further complicate an already complex political situation, and Palestinians say political and diplomatic efforts to defuse tension are not working.
It's all talks. It's all talks. And Netanyahu understands that. Unless the international community shows that it has teeth and it can pressure Israel, nothing will change. And they can pressure Israel. And they should pressure Israel. And they should impose sanctions on Israel.
The fear now is that a repeat of such scenes of grief, shock and anger could spark an unpredictable chain of reactions that politicians will be unable to control.
So a day of pain and a day of rage, really, at these tragic loss of these young men. Politicians, Palestinian politicians standing by, knowing full well how dangerous the situation can be. The Palestinian Prime Minister calling for the provision of international protection for Palestinians in the occupied territory, because in his words and that of the Palestinian President, Israel can no longer be above the law, violating international law while being in full control of the lives of ordinary Palestinians here. Back to you, Kamal.
All right, thanks for that, Noor. Noor O'Day there live for us in AWARTA. Noor, thank you. It was supposed to be a big day of diplomacy even. Latest arrival in the region is US Special Envoy George Mitchell. Ban Ki-moon was there earlier, met the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. With more on all of that, Shireen Tadros in Jerusalem.
Friends reunited after a brief spat.
Back in town, huh? Yeah,
Or at least that's what it looked like as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with US Envoy George Mitchell. Mitchell assuring Netanyahu of the unbreakable bond between Israel and the US.
It's always a pleasure for me to be back in Israel.
Mitchell's visit came after Netanyahu once again made clear his position on Jerusalem hasn't changed, despite the recent crisis over Jewish housing units to be built in occupied East Jerusalem. Netanyahu insisted occupied East Jerusalem is part of Israel, so Israeli construction there will continue.
Our policy towards Jerusalem is the same policy of all Israeli governments in the past 42 years, and it has not changed. From our point of view, construction in Jerusalem is like construction in Tel Aviv. These are things which we've made very clear to the American administration.
They're also things that fly in the face of what the international community is demanding of Israel. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, touring a war-ravaged Gaza Strip, reiterated the position of the quartet. Continued settlement building on occupied land, including in East Jerusalem, is illegal and must stop. Ban Ki-moon also called on Israel once again to ease Gaza's blockade and allow for vital materials to enter the Strip so reconstruction can take place. It's a gesture the Israeli Prime Minister may well consider in order to get back in the US's good books in the absence of making any real concessions on illegal building in Jerusalem. It's also reported opening up some checkpoints in the West Bank and releasing Palestinian prisoners may also be on the cards as so-called trust-building mechanisms. This looks like the start of a difficult week ahead for the Israeli Prime Minister. He needs to convince the Americans he's serious about making peace while not addressing the fundamental issue which led to this crisis, illegal construction in occupied East Jerusalem. Reports say Netanyahu may concede to US demands to hold proximity talks on final status issues like a return to 1967 borders. Netanyahu previously said he was not willing to have these issues on the table, but Palestinians say this is all just window dressing, hiding the most immediate point. If Israel doesn't stop building on the very land the two sides are negotiating over, then there's no point of even talking about talks. Shireen Tadros, Al Jazeera, West Jerusalem.
Let's broaden all this out with our senior political analyst, Moen Bishara, live in Washington, D.C. Moen, Benjamin Netanyahu, first of all, a lot of the comment been today that, well, what he said about building in East Jerusalem being like building in Tel Aviv, that's not new in itself. But he did say, quote, "These are the things which we have made very clear to the American administration." That is just directly throwing it back in the US's face, is it not?
Absolutely, Kamal. The whole point of this last few weeks were to make sure that at least if there is any agreement between the US and Israel is to leave everything ambiguous, and for the policy to be, as it is in the US military when it comes to homosexuals, don't ask, don't tell. The idea of settling in East Jerusalem was supposed to be on the lines of don't ask, don't tell, meaning Israel will continue to do what it wants to do in East Jerusalem, and the United States will not ask about it in public. But the slap that Vice President Biden got in the face when it was announced right when he was there, that, of course, destroyed all of that so-called constructive ambiguity in the peace process. And since the U.S. was trying to restore that ambiguity. But guess what? Once again, this time from the Prime Minister himself, making it clear that Israel is not going to hide behind an ambiguity when it comes to Jerusalem that they consider their own eternal capital, which, of course, puts a huge wrench in the peace process.
But then the relationship between the countries is looking ambiguous, isn't it?